Good evening and welcome to this webinar that's celebrating the 5 years of disability research on independent living and learning in Scotland. I'm not going to waste much time speaking because our Chief Executive is going to give you a rundown on what the drill research has been doing over the last 5 years. And then that will be followed by 4 presentations by research groups, all of whom included disabled people. So without any further ado, I'll go over to Sally Witcher. Dr. Sally Witcher is Inclusion Scotland's Chief Executive, and she's going to give you a brief introduction to what the drill research has been doing over the last 5 years. Sally?
Hello, good evening everybody, and welcome to Inclusion Scotland's webinar. If anybody wants to tweet about this, just to say it would be grateful if you could use the hashtag #celebratingdrill with a capital C and a capital D, because that's more accessible. So this event is to mark the end of the UK-wide drill programme. That's Disability Research on Independent Living and Learning, known as DRILL for short. And this has been underway for the last 5 years. It's been funded by a £5 million grant from the Big Lottery Community Fund, to whom we're obviously really grateful. And tonight we are going to celebrate some of its achievements. However, of course, the real celebration begins when the research that was co-produced with disabled people leads to a positive impact on disabled people's lives. This evening's event is hopefully a first step towards that goal. So a bit about the background to the programme. It was developed and delivered by 4 national disabled people's organisations. Those are organisations that are themselves led by disabled people, and they were 4 organisations from across the UK. The lead was Disability Action Northern Ireland, and then we worked in partnership with them and Disability Rights UK, Disability Wales, and Inclusion Scotland was the Scottish partner. The programme came about after a number of years of collaboration between us and our shared recognition of the need to generate new solutions for disabled people's independent living. It's worth just saying what we mean by independent living, because very often it's not really understood. People think it means living independently, as in fending for yourself, and it doesn't. What it means is that disabled people have the right support and access that enables them to have choice and control over their lives and to be equal citizens. So in order to do this, to find new solutions, we felt a new approach to doing research was needed. One that was led by the lived experience of disabled people themselves and co-produced with researchers, often academics. So in effect, disabled people were no longer the subject of research, which is where we often find ourselves, but equal partners in it. So across the UK, a total of 35 projects were funded, and a further 2 were commissioned pieces of research. Topics were very wide-ranging. For example, the rights of people with learning disabilities to a relationship, improving access to the justice system for people who are deaf, chronic illness and inclusion, and many, many others. This evening, you're going to hear about 4 of the 7 projects in Scotland that received funding, after which there'll be some time to take questions. So the 4 you're going to hear about today are one called Match Me, which is about what works for adapted social housing lettings. Another, this one on a society fit for autistics, examining the barriers faced by autistic people. The third is on the costs and benefits of good self-directed support. And the 4th is called A Public Inconvenience, Better Toilets for Inclusive Travel. I did say that they were a diverse range of topics. The others were, other 3 projects that were funded in Scotland were called Does It Matter? Decision Making by People with Learning Disabilities, increasing participation in civic and public life and co-producing solutions, and then services for who? The experiences of disabled people with other characteristics when accessing services. And that one was looking at intersectional discrimination. So you can find out more information about the DRILL program, and all the research reports are on the DRILL website, which is www.drilluk.org.uk. And just to say, I strongly recommend, if you're going to Google DRILL, that you put in the full title of the program, Disability Research on Independent Living and Learning, because what I discovered to my cost is that if you put in DRILL, you're going to get a lot of information you probably don't need about drills, types of drills, and drill bits. So that's probably enough from me. I hope you very much enjoy the webinar. And what I particularly hope is if you're somebody who's in a position to act on the research findings, that this is what you will do. So thanks very much, and back to Bill.
Thanks very much, Sally. That was great. Really good rundown of what the DRILL research program's been doing over the last 5 years. As Sally says, very, very diverse research that's been going on, and we'll hear right away from the first research group that's going to report back to us is the MatchMe project. I hope they're ready to present. Yeah, looks like it. And I'll just hand over to them just now.
Okay, so good evening, and thank you for inviting us. This presentation will discuss our project, MatchMe, What Works for Adapted and Accessible Social Housing Lettings. This was a partnership with Horizon Housing, Housing Options Scotland and the University of Stirling, with funding through the DRILL programme. I'm going to take you through a research which had a key focus on learning about what works for effective allocations by hearing the experiences of disabled people seeking housing and engaging directly with housing providers to find out about their practice. This co-production approach underpinned the project, as we were very much working in partnership with the people who were experiencing the topic we were researching. The focus today will be on the key findings of the research and our co-production methods. We had 4 research questions that were designed to investigate how we could enhance independent living for disabled people through the housing system. Our study mostly used qualitative methods. We investigated 3 case study local authority areas with the aim to track up to 10 disabled households in each area who were on the housing register or had been recently housed, and to interview or contact them 3 times over the period of a year. The longitudinal data collection involved a first interview, an interim follow-up telephone call to see how things were going, and then a second interview up to 12 months later. We also had discussions with stakeholders in case study organisations to talk about their lettings practice. And once we had collected all the data, we ran feedback workshops in 3 local authority areas, and 60 participants attended across the 3 feedback sessions. Our co-production approach included an advisory group led by disabled people that helped to shape the research and dissemination. And one of the researchers on the project from Stirling University, Diane Theakston, is registered blind. The engagement that we had with our housing service providers was also very important to the co-production approach. We also had 3 disabled peer researchers who worked with us, 2 with mobility impairments and 1 with a visual impairment. And the peer researchers carried out the majority of the interviews with disabled social housing applicants. And you'll hear from Chris, one of our peer researchers, just after me. The next part of my presentation will focus on our key findings. Within our 3 case study areas, there was a broad range of allocation systems: needs-based, points-based, group-based, and we had some applicants who had experience of the choice-based letting system. A positive finding was the distinctive mechanisms for assessing disabled people's needs for accessing housing, and none of these bodies were sending off piles of forms to medical practitioners to do the assessments. So we see that as a really welcome shift towards what we call the social model of disability, which is very much in line with disability rights frameworks rather than more old-fashioned medicalised models of disability. So that was all positive. But what we also found was that a lot of the allocation schemes still appear very complex for the applicant, and they didn't find it straightforward to understand how people are prioritised, and especially for those people with cognitive impairments, they found the choice-based letting systems a particular challenge. So, among the improvements to the application process that participants would like to have is to have a single named contact that supports them all the way through the process. This is maybe not straightforward to deliver. For example, one local authority thought this approach might be too resource intensive and that there were additional considerations. For example, there were part-time working of housing staff. Another thing that came through was the complexity of some of the households. So it could be adults with disabled children, or it could be two people with different impairments living in the household. And there was a feeling that the landlord was looking for who was the most disabled and what were their needs. So a strong recommendation is to look at the overall needs of the household. And the quote from Sam at the bottom of the slide shows a positive outcome of this. I can now do the dishes, cook, move unaided around the house, and I'm rediscovering my relationship with my husband, whose stress is reduced by having fewer caring tasks. Okay, so in terms of the actual lettings process and matching up applications, we found that there were sometimes gaps in the knowledge that the landlords had on their stock, such as they didn't know how many adapted properties they had, and what the adaptations were. So sometimes it came as a little bit of a surprise when they had to find somebody to fill a vacant property. So there is a case for being more strategic in the information held and potential for using new technology for having that information and matching up with applicants at an earlier stage in the process. There is the recommendation to search widely to get a good fit when an adapted property becomes vacant. And at the time of carrying out the research and under normal circumstances, there is a lot of pressure on providers to relet properties quickly. But the findings show that we might need to be realistic and say that it is going to take longer to get a good match for an adapted property, and allowing more time would make much more sense in the long run if we can get more sustainable matches. We also saw quite a lot of evidence of greater effectiveness of new build accessible housing. It is important to note that what we're not saying here, do not do adaptations, but there was considerable consensus that new build accessible properties offer greater scope to meet individuals' needs compared to the adaptation of older 20th century housing stock that was never designed to be adapted. And this brings in the voice of Rachel. So this is one of our disabled participants, and she had two very serious health conditions, but even with a stair lift installed, Rachel had to make 8 transfers between chair, wheelchair, stair and toilet and back down again. And this impacted negatively on her health and disability. So this highlights the challenge of adaptations versus new build and shows that while we can make people's homes more livable in, this may not always make them fully accessible. So in terms of offers and viewings, this was one of our most challenging findings. Over the course of the year and tracking our 28 participants, most either didn't get any offer at all or received an offer that they considered to be inappropriate. And only 2 of our households moved from being on the register and into accessible housing during the course of the year. And in both cases, that wasn't the end of the story, as they were both still waiting on adaptations being completed in their new home. It came across really clearly that for people moving into properties, that it's not just about the internal design of the property and being able to move about it, but the external environment is also important, getting in and out of the property and enabling independent living in the local community. and gardens were a very high priority, as well as access to community services such as GPs. And we had an example of a participant who had used their own iPad to make a video of a property they were viewing because their partner was housebound and unable to attend the viewing. One of the responses to COVID-19 has been that some landlords are now harnessing technology for making video walkthroughs of properties to let. Therefore, what was previously one of our recommendations may now increasingly become a requirement to safely let homes. My next slide shows some of the extra features that are available from such technologies. Okay, so these are some screenshots of a virtual viewing of my daughter's house. The technology allows for a 360-degree viewing of her house, and it's a bit like Google Street View. You should be able to see circles on the floors in the pictures of our living room and hallway, and by clicking on these, allows you to walk through that room or move into another room. The house can also be viewed in what's called a doll's house view, which you can see in the picture in the top right-hand corner, and this lets you see how the property fits together. There is also a tape measure function that allows you to select areas to measure for size, and this could be very important when looking at things like, is there enough turning space for a wheelchair? We have recommendations for local authorities and the Scottish Housing Regulator, and these are available in the full report. But as we're time limited, I'm going to focus on the recommendations to the Scottish Government. A lot of the things we're recommending here don't require big changes in legislation, and they're not hugely expensive either. Technological developments might need a little bit of financial investment or encouragement for both the landlords and disabled people, and access to technology is obviously important. But we recommend support for more flexible and accessible lettings practice to encourage landlords to search more widely to find a suitable match for accessible properties. Continue to encourage local authority targets for new build projects to increase the proportion of new build accessible housing, and the Still Minding the Step report looks at these numbers required. The development of higher minimum accessibility standards for new build and all housing generally, so that it's more economical, easier and faster to adapt as required. And one final point is there is a national accessible housing register, Home to Fit. If there has been support provided by the Scottish Government to develop this, and it seems a promising way forward, and we would recommend more investment in and encouragement for its national use. So I'm now going to pass you over to Chris Baird, who's one of our peer researchers, and he will share some of his reflections and experiences.
What attracted me to the role of peer researcher was the co-production approach of a study and the opportunity to improve my knowledge of the housing sector in relation to disabled people. So what is co-production? It's about working together on an equal basis, utilising our mutual strengths and skills to bring about positive change. As a disability activist, this approach is important to me because it's not tokenistic, and disabled people's input and contribution is equally valued. This is mutually beneficial, resulting in better outcomes for disabled people and housing providers having more effective practices, policies and services. Although I was excited about my role as a peer researcher, I was also a bit nervous about it, but felt reassured from the training I received from the research assistant in the team. I had the opportunity for my first couple of interviews to be shadowed by the research assistant, and this helped to build my confidence. Although things didn't start too well, with my vehicle breaking down on a motorway en route to the first interview, leaving me and the research assistant stranded on the hard shoulder of the M80 for 3 hours whilst we waited in the RAC, testing both our patience and bladder control to the limit. I was reassured by the support I got from the research assistant and the team, with their flexible approach and their willingness to help with any issues that arose, and that my direct lived experience as a disabled person and the skills that I've gained from my working and volunteering life were relevant and would be useful. I also have an inquisitive nature and a curious mind and ask a lot of questions, so much so that one of my friends calls me Inspector Baird, although I hope none of the participants felt interrogated, and I can confirm no waterboarding was used in any of the interviews. There's a growing recognition of the value of peer research. An important aspect of this is a shared understanding of lived experience and common language that can help research interviewees to say what they really think. A 2009 study by the homeless charity St Mungo's noted that subjects were more liable to open up to peer researchers and to be more honest in their responses, thus giving more accurate data. I hope the interviewees in the MatchMe project found it beneficial that the peer researcher self-identified as a disabled person who had a shared understanding of lived experiences of the issues involved. This also has potential to be a double-edged sword. Academic and peer researchers alike bring their own beliefs and experiences into the research process. This can be more of an issue in a peer research project where the researcher has, by definition, an empathy with interviewees and is likely to have a strong interest in the topic being researched. But this can be dealt with effectively by proper training and supervision, as can dealing with potentially distressing situations. I hope the findings and recommendation based on people's experiences from the MatchMe research project help improve policy and practice and make positive changes to the allocation of adapted social housing in Scotland. It is clearly apparent that there are not anywhere near enough fully accessible properties to meet people's housing needs. Whilst the Scottish Government should be commended for the 35,000 social rented housing over the period of this Parliament, I firmly believe the Scottish Government missed a golden opportunity to address this severe lack of wheelchair accessible homes by failing to implement at least a 10% quota on these new homes. And I don't think the Scottish Government have gave a credible reason to why they never did this. That so many people are living in unsuitable and inaccessible properties is a badge of shame for 21st century Scotland. Having an accessible home that fully meets your needs is fundamental for disabled people to participate and contribute in society as full and equal citizens and to live independently in communities of our choice. Without it, it becomes so much harder, almost impossible, to access work, education, social and recreational opportunities, to lead an ordinary life and do the everyday things that non-disabled people take for granted, to have a dignified life and not just an existence. I'd like to finish, I'll be glad to hear, by saying I thoroughly enjoyed my role as a peer researcher, found it very informative, interesting and rewarding, and it was a pleasure to meet all the people I interviewed. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Julia and Chris. That was really interesting, and completely agree with you about a missed opportunity in terms of a quota for accessible housing. You'll be glad to know that Inclusion Scotland has used your research in briefings to parliamentarians. Unfortunately, we didn't convince them on the need for a quota, but we're going to keep on battling on that. I'm now going to hand you across to Marion Hirsch from the University of Glasgow, and this was peer research by autistic people on an alternative society fit for autistics. Marion, are you ready to go?
Yes, okay, an alternative, a society fit for autistics. I hope you can all hear me. This is divided into three main parts: introduction, recommendations, and reflections on co-production. First one, introduction, talking about the context. This is from a social model neurodiversity approach, which means in practice that we're excluded from all sorts of things due to barriers resulting from our different ways of thinking, communicating, behaving, being. This is obviously a problem for us, but it's also a problem for society, because society as a whole isn't benefiting from our participation. And the research shows the value of diversity, and the best people want to work for diverse organisations. Okay, moving on briefly to 1.1, the project and partners. I'm Marion Hirsch from the University of Glasgow. The other partners are Sharon Ellie from the University of Leeds, Michael Dawson and David Cowan, who are involved in a number of projects for autistic people in Glasgow, and Panda Murray in London. Ziggy Bank supports autistic students at the University of Leicester. Callum Watson used to support autistic students, and now he's an assistant psychologist. We have two quite broad research questions, which can be summarised as the strategies used by autistic people, particularly to understand social situations, other people's reactions, and for empowerment. And I think it's important to focus on strategies because that itself is empowering, that we can actually take control of our lives, take control of situations, and make changes. This obviously doesn't resolve organisations of the responsibility to remove barriers. And the second question is about the barriers which stop us doing things, particularly things like participating in decision making, the economy and the community. Now going on to the second part, recommendations. This is in several different sections, and the time becomes short. I'll skip over some of them to talk briefly about reflections on co-production. First of all, we're all very different. We're different as individuals. No one, or very few people, would assume all non-disabled people are the same, but it seems sometimes an assumption with autistic or other groups of disabled people. We're also very different in the ways in which we're affected by being autistic and the barriers we experience. And this means that we need person-centred approaches based on our particular needs rather than assumptions. We all say nothing about us without us. So this is the next point here. We need to be consulted, we need to be involved, and that needs to be done from the start. And it's not sufficient to just involve charities, even in charities, led by parents of autistic people, people who work with autistic people. Everyone needs to involve us. And we actually need to have a major role in drawing up and implementing policy, not just someone else does it and then we protest about it because it's gone wrong. Recognising and valuing us and our differences so we can actually contribute, and realising that because we do things differently, we can bring a lot of value to a lot of organisations, and both organisations and society as a whole can benefit from our involvement. When someone discloses they're autistic to you, don't say, no, you can't be. You've got a life, you've got a job, you've got a house. You can go to the shops on your own. No stereotypes and assumptions that people can't be autistic because they're not totally incapable. Instead say maybe thank you for telling me, possibly ask for some more information. Are there do's and don'ts? 2.1, communication. listen to autistic people, what we actually say, not what you think we said or what we should say. And one of the things that came out a lot in the questionnaire, I think particularly in the context of medical appointments, there were sort of assumptions that someone didn't look like they were in pain, and therefore they couldn't be in pain, even if they said they were. You know, so take what people say, don't reinterpret it because of your assumptions about what their body language is, and they're not showing the right body language. We also need a variety of ways to communicate. A lot of us prefer email and online systems, so telephone can be useful in some contexts, though it's very difficult for a lot of us. Face-to-face is also useful. You know, obviously, it's something like a doctor, you generally have to go face-to-face. But acceptance of people contacting in advance, using notes, rather than saying you have to say it all, but actually coming along prepared. Speak clearly, don't make assumptions, ask real questions rather than small talk type questions, which a lot of us find quite stressful. And, you know, or will maybe come out with, you know, with the full answer, the sort of traditional, how do you feel? Only ask that if you actually want to know, rather than if you want someone to say, okay. Don't rush to fill in gaps. Let us think about things and talk to us rather than other people. Reasonable adjustments 2.2. There are a wide range of reasonable adjustments, and again, this is something where, well, all workers really should be asked for their needs, and also recognise that as well as being autistic, we could be blind or deaf or wheelchair users, and don't assume that we sort of used up all our entitlement to reasonable adjustments through being autistic, and we can't have reasonable adjustments for other impairments. In terms of the workplace, a lot, and some other contexts, a lot of adjustments relate to sensory issues, things like quiet rooms, working at home for part of the time. Obviously, this is happening more at the moment. Being able to work in small groups, and also flexible timetables, which are agreed with the autistic person rather than imposed by a boss. 2.3, employment. Again, some suggestions for the workplace, confidential mentoring schemes, buddy schemes, and where feasible, animals in the workplace, because they can be quite distressing for autistic people. And yes, we can want to participate in social events, but we don't want them to be compulsory, and we don't want to have to stay for 3 hours, whereas maybe 10 minutes is sufficient. Then very briefly, 2.4, support. A lot of us need support, so it shouldn't just be, you know, we shouldn't just be categorized into groups and only those are considered to have high support needs get it. There's particular value in self-help groups, you know, for things like post-diagnosis support, where people can get information from other autistic people about what being autistic means. And now moving on to 3 reflections on co-production. This is a process and it needs quite a lot of time and resources to get it right. And that's something for funders to think about. It can lead to much better quality research, but it does need the effort put in. And, you know, one of the things we hadn't realised is quite the long lead time for getting to know each other, agreeing how we work together, share documents, and plan the work. And I think, you know, one of the issues in terms of working together was that several of us had communication and document accessibility issues, which were sort of different, and it made it difficult to work around that. You know, I think all projects need a balance between quality and quantity, and in co-production, it's the quality where the stress should be because it gives real scope for that. But because things can take longer, funders and, you know, other organisations and the team itself should realise that quantity might be less. We should all, you know, there should also be understanding that the team brings different skills and experiences, and that's of great value. 3.1, co-production continued. We had a geographically spread team, which had advantages in being able to research different areas, but we would have benefited more if there'd been at least 2 partners in each area to bounce ideas off, talk to each other, and so on. And we'd also got rather small slices of time each, and that can be difficult. So we feel that it's useful to be able to spend at least 1 day a week. And we had the training budget, but we somehow didn't manage to use it. But people said afterwards they would have liked training. So we think more advice and support in identifying suitable training would be useful. I think I've come to the end of my time. I would encourage you to look at the reports on the website, link on the last slide, and there are also some contact emails. So thanks for listening.
Thanks very much, Marion. Really, really impressed by the research, and I'm really happy that we were able to support neurodiverse researchers to carry out research on neurodiversity and the needs of autistic people. I think it's really important for DPOs to really learn some of the lessons from this as well, and make sure that we fully include autistic people amongst all the disabled people we're supposed to represent. So the next presentation is on costs and benefits of good self-directed support, and I'll ask Etienne and Siobhan, I hope you're ready and can begin your presentation.
Thank you for being here and to listen to the initial findings of the costs and benefits of good self-directed support project. The team for the project consisted of Professor Kirsten Rummery, who's the principal investigator. Unfortunately, she can't be here tonight, and nor can Dr. Elaine Douglas or Professor David Bell, sadly. I'm Dr. Siobhan Russell, and you've heard a little bit from Julia earlier on. And also here tonight are our partners from GSIL, Etienne de Aberville, and Dr. Jim Elder-Woodward. You'll hear a little bit from Etienne later. For more than 20 years, local authorities have been developing and implementing support programs under a range of titles, including direct payments, cash for care, consumer-directed care, and self-directed support. Often these are categorized under the personalization agenda, the goal being ostensibly to give people control of their support. This basically means that the government across the UK and indeed globally want to shift the way in which support and social care for disabled people is delivered, moving financial control into the hands of the individual, allowing them to participate in daily life the way they want to, more in line with the social model that was discussed in the first presentation. In Scotland, this programme has come to be known as self-directed support and was introduced in April 2014. Essentially, this gives people who receive social care services in Scotland the right to have choice and control and flexibility and to live the life the way they wish. Now, traditionally, this kind of support has been thought of as a cost to the public purse. But when we were developing this project, we thought, well, what if you actually think of it as an investment? So on that basis, we set out to, to answer three basic questions. First of all, what does good self-directed support really mean in this context? What are the benefits of good support? And what would it cost to implement that sort of system in Scotland and throughout the UK? Now, you'll have noticed from looking at the slide that number 3, how much would it cost to implement, is crossed out. That detail isn't being presented tonight due to some unforeseen personal circumstances within the research team, but it will be in the final report, hopefully in months to come. So what did we do? We looked at similar schemes in other countries to help us establish what good and bad looked like internationally. And this helped us to formulate the questions that we asked as part of the project. We set up a website, which we called the Good Self-Directed Support website, and we used it to share information about the survey that we set up and also about where and when the focus groups that we set up would be taking place. And then we tweeted about this a lot, so much so that at one stage I was briefly blocked from Twitter because they thought I was a robot. So in the end, we held 6 focus groups, typically consisting of between 4 and 8 participants and lasting for about 90 minutes. The online survey was developed with the aim of gathering user experiences about STS, and we had 124 fully completed responses and more than 25 partially completed responses. Of those responses, 80%, that's the completed ones, 80% were female. A broad range of ages took part, which you'll see from the graphic on the right. Around a quarter of them were under 35 years old. Almost a third were between 45 and 55. The older age range, 65 plus, was the smallest group, but it still represented around 8% of the sample. Next slide. So what did we find? Well, when we look at the comments from the survey and the focus group about what makes STS good and bad, we see that STS has given some users flexibility to better match their needs, but there is marked inconsistency between local authorities and some users fear the bureaucracy and paperwork. What did we find continued? Some users fear saying the wrong thing and losing the support that they need. Some users couldn't get the support they wanted because different services didn't work together. Some people felt they had very good advocacy and support from their local Glasgow Centre or DPO, but that depended very much on the local authority. Control and choice and flexibility were the most important features, more flexibility being sought on what the SDS budget may be used for. Now, a minority of the people we spoke to said that they disliked the flexibility, but if you drilled down into that, that tended to mean that they were concerned about associated levels of paperwork. A number of people, in line with what we've looked at in terms of systems in other countries, said that they would like to be able to employ family members to provide part of their care, and for that to be paid for through a system like SDS, as is the case in France, Italy, and the US. There were concerns among our participants about the lack of transparency in the process around the implementation and the use of SDS. I'm very much aware that this is an overview, but I'm happy if we've got time in the Q&A to talk about some of the details of that. Next slide, please. Recommendations. 1, establish a national system with SDS regarded as a social right. 2, standardise SDS training for social workers. 3, improve consistency across local authorities. 4, align local and national policies. Improve collaboration among professionals. 6, reduce bureaucracy. 7, increase advocacy and support. And 8, establish an independent appeals system. Now, why establish a national system? We found that there are marked differences in how people are assessed and their support is delivered both between and even within local authorities. This can turn SDS into a postcode lottery. In some instances, local authorities were very inflexible in their delivery of SDS. In some local authorities, there was excessive scrutiny of how SDS was used, while in other local authorities, there was no scrutiny at all. The length of time taken to obtain support, some participants said, was unnecessarily long, despite government advice to reduce these wait times. A national system with clear eligibility criteria is the key change that participants said that they wanted. And they said that this was all the more important in the ongoing context of austerity. Next slide, please. Now, this is where I would like to hand over to Etienne to talk about experiences of co-production and its challenges for the project.
Thank you very much, Siobhan. I hope everyone can hear me. I'd first of all just like to thank Siobhan for taking the time to, even though she's actually no longer at Stirling, has moved down to Oxford, just taking the time to come and co-present today at this event. I've been asked to say a little bit about co-production, some of the benefits and challenges. Somebody once said, if you haven't got a seat at the table, it's probably because you're on the menu. And it's certainly felt a little bit like that over the years in relation to social care support, as we've seen so many changes over the years, but often only little, if any, improvement, and often actual deterioration in the support we've got access to. But in principle, co-production gives us the opportunity to combine the best of academic expertise with the reality of lived experience, as we've heard from others. And we believe it's essential that it's accountable, that those most affected by research are fully involved in it. So nothing about us without us, as one of the other projects was already quoted. It's been a key slogan of the independent living movement for many years. I think it's important to be involved in the design right at the early stages, not in the latter stages, by which time most of the key decisions are probably already been made. We've been asked how important it was for this research to be co-produced ahead of time, one of the advanced questions. And I think I might as well just answer that now if I can, in saying I think it's absolutely essential. I think in this project, the lived experience that we were able to bring as a DPO that supports well over 900 people using different forms of self-directed support in 3 local authority areas was absolutely essential. We've been able to draw on collectively on over 40 years campaigning by disabled people and their organisations for more empowering forms of social care, and to try and make sure that that resulted in increasing choice and control over our lives. I think we wanted to make sure that we saw social care support as a key tool enabling disabled and older people to enjoy full citizenship and human rights. So it's what Sally was referring to earlier as a social model of independent living, one that made choice control and what some people called agency right at the centre. So it's not simply just about keeping people out of hospital or doing everything independently of other people and so on. And I think we were able to ensure that that set of principles stayed at the heart of what we were doing. Some of the challenges, well, perhaps an understatement to say that we had a bit of a bumpy ride. We had a key member of the team go off sick for a considerable period. We had to recruit a new research assistant halfway through the project. And as Siobhan was saying, through some really quite unavoidable personal events, affected the availability of some key staff, particularly at certain times that we needed them. How could we have avoided that? Well, I suppose with the benefit of hindsight, we probably didn't set the budget realistically. I think also on reflection, I think it would have been better if we had had more even split between the role of ourselves as a DPO and the academic institution. So in practice, it was something like 95% of the funding and the activity was university-based, with the rest being ourselves. And I don't think that made for the best co-production on reflection. One of the things that might have helped that would have been to have perhaps the research assistant or somebody partly based at the CIL, so that it would have been more intimately connected. And I think one of the other researchers, one of the projects mentioned about how co-production takes time to get to know each other, and you have to communicate often and regularly and well, and we perhaps didn't do enough of that. The other thing that's been acknowledged by partners in academia is that we probably underestimated the contingency budget we needed, because all of the issues that we encountered, we could have at least partly mitigated had we had sufficient funding to deploy additional resources. I think also on reflection, we were perhaps a little ambitious in the way we designed the project in total. We're trying to get a lot of qualitative stuff, which we've done. There's bags more where that came from, apart from what Siobhan was saying. So hopefully, if you get a chance to look at the report when it finally comes out, some really rich material in there. The other issue that was a potential barrier was inflexible procedures within academia. So for instance, we had a lot of trouble getting project through the ethics committee, who seem very obsessed with the vulnerability of disabled people, when that can be easy to overstate. And I think on reflection, we should probably have concentrated either on the qualitative stuff or on the quantitative stuff, which is slightly disappointing and a little embarrassing that we haven't got to present to you today. What advice would we give other third sector organisations want to co-produce research? Well, I suppose choose your academic partner carefully, and I don't really think particular by that. It's important that you have a kind of synergy in the way that you work. Make sure you're properly resourced to play a full part. But I would say do it if it's something that you feel that you can and should add value to. Can I have the next slide, please? I don't know if I've got any time left, but I'd just like to make some. Am I run out?
I'm afraid you've run out, Jen.
Okay.
Yeah,
I was going to make some reflections on as to why I think the research is so important to the current context. And in fact, there is some evidence around about the financial benefit of investing in social care support. So I'm sorry I've gone over my time, but if there's a little bit of time later, I'm happy to answer any questions about those aspects of it.
Thanks very much, Siobhan and Etienne. I'm sorry I'm going to have to cut you off, but we're really tight for time, and I do want to be able to introduce the final research project. But I think very important research, and I certainly hope that it is fully completed very soon, because I think it would be really useful evidence that the legislation isn't working the way that we wanted it to, and if it needs to be adapted and to suit people's needs, then that is what's going to have to happen. So the final research project I'm introducing is a public inconvenience, and Fiona Suter and Andy Hyde are going to be speaking to that, and it was a very collaborative project, and I hope that well, I know for a fact it's already had an impact in terms of public policy in Scotland. So Fiona, Andy, you ready to begin?
Sure. Thanks, Bill.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Fiona, super. Thanks. Well, good evening, everybody. I'm Andy from Go Upstream. We work with people with dementia, bringing them together with people who provide transport services to try and improve transport experiences, journeys, if you like. Fiona.
And hi there, my name's Fiona, and I work with a charity called PAMIS. We're based in Scotland, and we support people living with multiple complex disabilities, and my role is really championing toilet access and particularly changing places toilets for people with more complex disabilities.
So we're going to tell you about a project that looked into a challenge that we've all probably encountered at some time, which is finding a toilet along a journey. Knowing that we'll be able to find an appropriate toilet is an essential part of journey planning. And if we can't find or use a suitable toilet, we might decide to wait until we reach our destination, or we might decide not to travel at all. And both of these options are bad for our health and well-being. So it all started when a few of us who already knew each other realized that we were starting to talk about the same challenge, that people that we were supporting or working with were finding it hard to find a toilet that met their needs when they were traveling. And everyone seemed to have a story about it, but no one was really talking about it. So we decided we would gather some evidence about what the real challenges are and try and tell the world about them. And you'll see the partners there on the screen. We worked very closely. It was led by the Edinburgh Centre for Research on the Experience of Dementia at the University of Edinburgh, myself at Go Upstream, Fiona and colleagues at PAMIS, Hammond Care, who support people with dementia, and many other people around the world. Scottish Dementia Alumni, so these are people that have been diagnosed for a long time with dementia and have a great set of experience and knowledge to bring to it. Scotland's Urban Past, who helped us around the methodology, which we'll tell you more about, but helped to skill people up in terms of being co-researchers and gathering evidence. And of course, Drill as our funding supporter.
Yes, so we brought together a team of 10 people who live with a disability, and they effectively became our co-researchers. We tasked them with taking journeys across Scotland and recording their experiences of finding toilets. So during this time, we collected over 1,000 photos. We also collected 78 diaries across 86 separate locations, and that was over 9 regions of Scotland. We then organised 2 initial workshops where we designed the process and data gathering tools with disabled people. The first one was at a sports centre in Aberdeen, and the other one was at the Thistle Foundation in Edinburgh.
So others have mentioned the importance of getting to know each other, and for us, this was a really good opportunity to bring people with different disabilities together, to meet each other, to share experiences, but then also to design the project process together. We had people with dementia involved, along with people with learning disabilities and those caring for disabled children. So we talked about the methodology, we tried out the data gathering tools that we created, and then we asked them to record a toilet visit in the building that we were in. To discuss, and then we discussed how to improve the tools that we tried out.
Yeah, so they had plenty to say about how things could be improved, but also said how powerful it was to work with each other and see things from someone else's point of view. So after reviewing the tools and plans, our co-researchers headed out on their journeys and we waited for the results to come in. After a few months, our university partners started to analyse the pictures and the diaries, and then we organised a third gathering in Dundee to bring together all of the co-researchers, and that allowed us to discuss the results and share experiences and come up with lots of ideas.
So we began to see that the experiences suggested three main challenges, and these are described in detail in our report, The Public Inconvenience. And the clues are on the cover. So it says public toilets that are easy to find and simple to use mean no distress. So let's look at what we found.
So the first main conclusion was that toilets are difficult to find and access. So the main issues for people were that toilets are generally out of the way and can be a real challenge to find. Also, the absence of toilets, so particularly changing places toilets, there's so few of those available, or often the changing places toilet or the accessible toilet are out of order. The toilet is often locked. Staff don't have the key. We had examples where staff didn't know what a radar key was. We also found a lot of examples of signage that was poor. That's including signage on the toilet facility itself or directional signage in the building pointing towards the toilet. And another difficulty was using change machines, which a lot of people find difficult to use, and we're still having to pay 20 pence to go to the loo in some cases.
And this is an example. This is a sign at a railway station, and somewhere in there, so this shows a sign with lots of arrows and text and then icons, and somewhere hidden in there it says toilets and taxis. And actually the icon for the toilet, it looks quite similar. It's a blue picture, and it's got two white icons of people. And we often see this icon that looks a little bit like the one we use for lifts as well. So sometimes the signage we use is actually quite confusing, let alone difficult to understand. And this is a quote from our report. This is one of the co-researchers said, "I took over 15 minutes to locate toilets in an outhouse area along a narrow, dirty and poorly lit alleyway. Toilets seemed very threatening with large iron bars like a jail block. And in fact, we had a number of discussions where people said that they were just difficult to find. And in fact, we started to talk about the secret toilet. It was as if people didn't want us to find the toilets."
Yeah, so also I just noticed someone's chat comment saying that they found beer being stored in a toilet. And yes, we've had lots of examples of the toilets being used as storage, and it's actually full of boxes and people can't actually get into the toilet and use it, which is just unacceptable. So our group came up with recommendations for these, and they were to locate public toilets in accessible areas, also to provide clear and detailed information, and ensure that the toilets are really visible. I mean, this all sounds quite straightforward, but actually in practice, it is not that simple. That the toilets are easy to get to in buildings and also on public transport. Using clear signs and directions that take you straight to the toilet would be very helpful. and help staff to offer better support by providing excellent training and keys to let people into toilets.
So our second recommendation, our second findings was that toilets are difficult to use, and which might sound a bit strange until we consider some of the examples. People often said that the actual cubicles or the rooms were too small and cluttered. Sometimes we find beer in there. There's often confusion between the dryers and the air fresheners and the heaters, the way that things look. Often the emergency cord is knotted up and not on the ground, which we hear about all the time. Buttons that we have to press are absolutely bewildering, and often there is poor lighting, or actually just don't know how to turn the light on. We had some horror stories of people being plunged into darkness when they closed the door. And we got some pictures here. This is a picture of an accessible toilet, apparently, but actually the person who used this and said they were in a wheelchair said it was just impossible to reach the tap. It was just too high up. Here are some really difficult buttons to work out. These are the buttons that open and close the toilet door on a train. This is a picture that somebody took on their travels. The one on the left is a tap. It's just a thing sticking out of the wall, which doesn't really look like a tap. And the one on the right is, I think, is a soap dispenser. And they said, poor design consideration, taking away the independence of people, opting for style over function. So the recommendations from this were that decision makers can insist that toilets are designed in a way that avoids problems that we've been talking about, and that disabled people need to be involved in writing and checking the standards. In particular, designers could work with disabled people to create, well, better types of emergency cords, but just generally better types of toilets. Okay, I'm just watching the time here, Fiona. We need to probably speed up a bit.
Go as quickly as I can.
So our third set.
Yes, our third conclusion was that using the toilet can often be distressing. So lack of colour contrast, or in the opposite, too many bright colours and very noisy hand dryers, lots of harsh smells and poor cleanliness, and people reported feelings of anxiety, feeling uncomfortable, confused, panicked, disgusted, and also nauseous. This image is of a mirror, which people with dementia reported that they found distressing because they're wondering who is looking back at them. There are simple ways to avoid this, but this example shows a mirror that's placed right in front of the toilet, which isn't great, really. And so the recommendations from our group were that policymakers could ensure greater public awareness of the distress caused by poor design and equipment, and that service providers and authorities can provide sufficient staff to ensure the maintenance and hygiene of public toilets.
So we had some really important messages to get across, and reports are great and slides are fine, but we wanted to use something different. So we came up with the idea of using drama. And so with the help of a wonderful theatre group called Active Inquiry in Edinburgh, our co-researchers wrote a play about their experiences and performed it at our launch event at Victoria Quay in Edinburgh, at the heart of Scottish Government. And we made a film of the play, which we were hoping to show you tonight, but we just can't do that. So it's available on our website, which we'll share with you at the end. And I'd urge you to have a watch of that. There's all kinds of ways of watching it. There's lots of, it slices it up into different scenes. So very quickly, we're running out of time. Let's just go through what we've learned from this. Fiona, do you want to kick off?
Yes, so firstly, expect the unexpected. When you're talking about toilets, all kinds of stories emerge and unusual things happen. For example, people were challenged in stations by staff when collecting the information, so we had to provide a letter to prove they were undertaking research.
Bring people together and create spaces to work together and learn from each other. There are lots of words that we use to describe this kind of approach, but in the end, we need to create friendly, creative spaces that really enable people to work with each other.
Again, it sounds obvious, but it is important to really listen and be prepared to change plans. So testing out the ideas before you put them into action. We might have thought we had good ideas, but once we got people together to the initial gatherings, they had other better ideas. And the key thing we think is to really listen and develop better solutions together.
and consider what inclusion really means in reality. What's going to enable people to participate? We had one co-researcher who thought she wouldn't be able to take part because she had no one to care for her children. And so in the end, we created an art table for the kids during a workshop, which meant that she was able to fully take part, which meant a lot to her, but it also meant a lot to us as well. So we've got to really think carefully about what inclusion means.
And then finally, we tried to find different ways to tell our story. So, you know, we're so used to writing reports and we can make slides about the project, but we wanted to blog our experiences along the way, make full use of social media and Twitter to make friends and get the message out online. But the most powerful we found was actually the filming of the play, which was created by our co-researchers and really reflected their experiences and the messages that were important to them.
So we've learned so much during this project. Hopefully you've learned a little bit more about toilets this evening and the challenges that we find. In a way, this feels even more important in the current climate. Our confidence to get out and about and travel doesn't just depend on the transport, but also knowing that appropriate and safe toilets are available along the way. And they're not just COVID secure, but also they're accessible and inclusive. So now more than ever, we need to feel confident that we can find and use a toilet along our travels, no matter what our needs are. So we're going to leave you with a couple of quotes from our reports that describe what we think we need to do in order to achieve this. The first one is, we need to hear the experiences of people who are disabled in different ways to ensure that everyone's needs are taken into consideration.
Also, if we want to reduce isolation and help disabled people to remain active and independent, we need to ensure that everyone can find a suitable toilet when they travel.
So you can head over to toiletsandjourneys.wordpress.com. You can take a look at the blog we put together. You can take a look at more about our methodology. The film is there, and that will take you to YouTube, where all the other parts of the film are as well. And you can follow us on Twitter, of course. So a big thank you to Drill for their support. Thanks to our project partners who made it happen, helped to make it happen. But in particular, thanks to our co-researchers who did such a brilliant job of bringing this whole thing to life. And thanks to you for listening.
Thanks very much, Fiona and Andy. I would really recommend the film of the play to everyone. I was privileged to see the play live down at Victoria Quay, and it really is powerful, and it made a really great case for more accessible toilets, in particular for changing places toilets. And I know that the research has already had a real effect in public policy, because all new buildings above a certain size in Scotland are now going to have a changing places toilet within them. That's retail and leisure centres, train stations, bus stations, etc. So, this is proof that the research can actually be used as a tool to gain changes in public policy, which is what the research set out to do in the first place. That was what the Drill research objectives were, that we would develop research which would provide solutions and evidence as to why change was needed. So I'm going to go back to Andy and Fiona now. We've not a lot of time left, but what little we have, we're going to spend on some questions that have been submitted via Eventbrite. And the first one is for Andy and Fiona, and it's, what's been the best and most difficult aspects of working between academia and DPOs?
That's a great question. So I think for me, the best thing, I guess, was having access to some of the resources and skills and networks of the academic world. So, all that data analysis, it took a long time, and, we and our co-researchers couldn't have done that on our own. So having access to those skills and also the networks to disseminate. So these messages will have gone out to different places. I think publications are planned, and we've been to conferences, that kind of thing. So being part of that world is a great plus. I think the difficult thing, one of the other projects mentioned earlier on, things like getting ethics approval and sort of fitting into those academic frameworks is really hard. And it's hard because we don't know how it works most of the time. So it's really kind of learning as we go along as to how to do that. And really practical things like just dealing with expenses and just fitting in with academic practicalities like that, I guess, where we had to sort of bend the rules a little bit, well, not bend them, but find ways to make things a little easier for people.
Yeah, thanks very much, Andy. You want to add anything, Fiona?
No, that actually sums it up well, actually. Thanks, Andy.
Thank you. Thank you. So quickly moving on, this is a question for Marion. What attempts were made to include or examine cross-cutting issues, such as communication barriers, for example? Marion.
Okay, I'll talk specifically about communication barriers because I'm not sure what other cross-cutting issues the question refers to. And our research involved a questionnaire which was available online, also in other formats, but I think it was just filled in online, and also some interviews. Communication wasn't what, I mean, the topics things were organised into were based on particular types of services, and then there was also technology. And in the questionnaire, there were both open and closed questions. In some of the closed questions, for instance, with doctors, we gave some examples of strategies that might or might not be useful, and indicated that people should mark the ones they used. And these were sort of included several communication strategies, things like finding a practice you can contact by email, asking someone else to phone for appointments, having a prepared list of questions. In the technology section, we sort of asked for preferred ways of communicating with service providers. The interviews were semi-structured, and we tended to follow what people said, but the issues we sort of wanted to come out included communication preferences, and also things like investigating some of the issues that had come out of the questionnaire. What was it about email and phone that made email often much easier to use for autistic people than phone? I won't say that was always the case, but there was a very strong preference. So we wanted to know the reasons, and, yes, we did get some reasons, but I won't go through them here.
Yeah. Thanks very much, Marion. The next question, it's for Julia, but if there's anybody else in the project that feels that they want to answer it, we can put them on. But it's how do we ensure local authorities, planning services themselves ensure that housing providers, when building new housing, build adequate numbers of wheelchair accessible housing?
Yep, no, thank you, Bill. Yep, so an important question. So the research by MatchMe, we were looking at the user experience of allocations, but there's additional research that's been published by our partner Horizon Housing in 2018, and that publication is still minding the step. And that provides a model to make local housing needs calculations. So the publication anticipates that there'll be an 80% rise in the population of wheelchair users by 2024. And with this, there will be obviously an inevitable rise in unmet needs. So that unmet need may rise from 17,226 to 31,007 households. So if we take the recommendations from Still Minding the Step, and some of these are also mirrored in the MatchMe findings, we recommend that wheelchair standard housing to be within all mainstream housing and not just restricted to specialist housing. Furthermore, there is this need for a cross-tenure design standard, and a lack of this is a barrier, and it's not just about adequate numbers, it is about adequate quality and design. The Still Minding the Step recommended, and the Scottish Government has since placed a requirement on local authorities to assess needs for wheelchair standard housing and to set local targets. So the Scottish Government needs to monitor and publicise these at local and national levels. So here we would emphasise the strategic role of local authorities to assess the realistic needs in their areas. They also need to follow Scottish Government guidance, but they also have scope to go beyond minimum requirements, ideally in partnership with co-production planning groups. So you should all have the link to the MatchMe research, but I will send the link to the Still Minding the Step research to Inclusion Scotland so that that can be shared with anyone that has an interest in that.
Thanks very much, Julia. I think it's really important question that was asked there, and a great answer. I was stunned to find out that many local authorities did their planning for wheelchair accessible housing by phoning up their own social work department and saying, how many people in wheelchairs have you got on your books? And of course, that isn't planning at all for future need. That's just assessing what your current need might be, because of course, not every wheelchair user is in receipt of social care. So they were always falling short. Instead of the question that was put to Etienne and Siobhan, I'm going to ask Etienne if he wants to come back with some of the reflections that he might have on the research, as he was unable to complete his presentation earlier. Etienne, would you like to say a wee bit?
Thank you, yeah, and I'm sorry we didn't manage to fit it into the time available when we were able to present. I suppose I'm just conscious that we're presenting this research at a time when there's a massive amount of work going on, some key decisions being taken on a national, on whether we need national, local systems, what balance of that we need, kind of funding mechanisms we need, what the eligibility criteria should be, whether it's for people with high levels of need or medium or low and so on. There's some huge issues going on. And we really haven't had time to do justice in the time available on the extent, I suppose, of the huge issues that we're facing. And that stuff around life and limb support that's being provided because of eligibility criteria being manipulated in order to manage demand, lack of preventative support, the postcode lottery, problems with assessment process, availability of independent support, the care tax charging process, whole range of issues, which you might call process issues. And we know that there's a lot of work already going on, for instance, within the Reform of Adult and Social Care Programme, which is being supported, thank goodness, by the people-led policy panel co-productively. So hopefully they're looking at some of those issues in some detail. It would also be odd not to mention the COVID experience when we're talking about all of this, because again, there's lots of emerging evidence about how that's magnified existing inequalities, and plenty of evidence that social care has been a major issue for many disabled and older people as part of that. So what that awareness of that evidence has led to is the Feely review being announced within the last programme for government. And we welcome that, although we'd like to have seen a lot more concrete measures. But I just think it's really good that we're now having much more of a conversation about not just the process issues, but the purpose of social care. So it's coming back to what Sally was saying right at the beginning about citizenship, human rights and social justice. and seeing this as an integral part of that. And I think if we can shape the debate and shape the outcome along those terms, then we might have a chance of getting something that will serve disabled people a lot better. And part of that will be about seeing that it's a real investment. It isn't something that should be seen as a burden on local authorities or HSCPs competing with other sources, with other services, but it's something that by investing in, we can really draw out the potential of disabled people and also further the social justice agenda. And I just wanted to quickly mention in passing, we hope to be able to contribute to this with the economic modelling once that's finally concluded by our colleagues in Stirling. But there's already some other stuff emerging. The Independent Living Fund Scotland Northern Ireland report, which is based on a social return on investment model, has shown that for every £1 invested in social care, there's just under £11 in benefits to a wide range of stakeholders. And I've just come across some other research by Dehenau and Himmelwhite, which I've not seen before, which again was related to the COVID experience, saying that investing in social care can produce significantly better return on investment than even investing in construction. And incidentally, does a lot more to narrow the gender pay gap. And I just think there's some interesting observations there, which will serve as well in the current environment, given that there's so much going on about this.
Thanks very much, Etienne. I'm afraid I'm going to have to call it a night there. Can I thank all the presenters from all the research projects very much. I think everybody's found it very interesting. Really, really excellent research has been carried out. And as I say, it's being used already to try and convince policymakers that changes have to be made. I think, you know, Etienne's really summed up in some ways what needs to be done around self-directed sport, but in housing, toilets, and the needs of neurodiverse people. We hope the policymakers will listen. I'd also like to thank the other Inclusion Scotland staff members that have helped set this up tonight, working away behind the scenes. Sally, of course, who spoke at the outset, Rebecca, Lynn, Ethan, and Stuart. Thanks very much for all your contributions tonight. And thanks to everyone who's joined us to listen and watch the presentations. It's been great having everyone tonight, and I can tell you there's very, very good attendance. And you should be receiving information. All the links to the research are being provided to you, and we'll also provide links to other research that's been mentioned in the course of the presentations by the presenters. Thanks again to everyone, and a good evening, and I hope you and your families all stay safe and well during the current situation. And look forward, hopefully, to seeing some of you again in the future, because we'll be running more webinars now that we've got this one off the ground. We'll be running a few more in the future, I hope. Thanks again to everyone, and look forward to seeing you in the future. Bye.